Really looking forward to adding a new vocal track to all these songs. Anyways, we are in chapter 18. We left off roundabouts verse 11. Actually, we did read this verse, but we did not go into any depth. Everything's all crooked. Did some work here. Okay, now we're more dead on. All right, and everything's moving. Okay. So, and the merchants of the earth, which were... There we go. And the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buyeth their merchandise any more. I'm sorry. Yeah. Actually, all right, the kings of the earth weep over her, then the merchants of the earth begin to weep also. What are the kings of the earth? Did they weep and mourn? They bewail and lament for her. Even though these hate the whore. It's interesting. Sometimes people can hate and love at the same time. But they're lamenting over her demise. That's not that there's any personal love. It's very obvious. They weep and mourn over the loss of all the riches and all the material goods that this unification of Satan and the apostate peoples brings about. The merchandise of gold and silver and precious stones, and of pearls, and fine linen, and purple, and silk, and scarlet, and all fine wood, and all manner of vessels of ivory, all manner of vessels of most precious wood, and of brass, and iron, and marble, and cinnamon, and odours, and ointments, and frankincense, and wine, and oil, and fine flour, and wheat, and beasts, and sheep, and horses, and chariots, and slaves, and souls of men. And the fruits that thy soul lusted after are departed from thee, and all things which were dainty and goodly are departed from thee, and thou shalt find them no more at all. Okay. And the merchants of these things which are made rich by her shall stand afar off for the fear of her torment, weeping and wailing, and saying... All right, well, let's go back. Let's look at this list over a bit. And I guess, whatever. I'm not going to recap too deeply about the nature of these things. All right, so the whore, who is explained in other studies, and there's even a brief study where I explain at least the symbology behind the whore. In her, fall, Babylon has fallen, and in the revelation that in her is all the unclean and foul beasts and filthiness and abominations, and the blood of saints and all these things. We look back now on what was, just like with Sodom. Sodom fell, and Lot's wife looked back to see, and wistfully thinking, and this makes me think of that sort of the bystanders lamenting the fall. And I don't even know, as far as these merchants being, as far as I'm concerned, the merchants are probably just as much part of the whore, but this is a symbolic weeping to show us what had been, and so, she brought about such riches and prosperity, because the disasters that hail the beginning of the tribulation, Satan, when he appears, he will help the world overcome it and return to a somewhat of a normalcy, and all the world is going to worship him for that, and for the fact of the miracles that he's able to perform, and that in and of itself is a miracle. And all this trade will begin again. You think about the modern world. We have such, possessions. We're so, we have so many material goods. It's people depend on that. When that's taken away, what people, I mean, like, think about it. When the power goes out, I mean, you just can't wait for the power to get back on. Very few people are like, oh, great, now I can, I have every excuse to go mow the lawn, or I don't know. There's a lot of things that don't use electricity, but what about when you run out of gasoline, you can't mow the lawn? What about when all those things are gone, and you're figuring out how do you make a torch? How does that done? And you're thinking, like, can we get some wood to burn to stay warm? We depend on our technology, and for us, technology is it's part of the riches, and it's part of what we are addicted to. Gold and silver, obviously valuable precious metals, precious stones, jewelry, pearls, fine linen, false righteousness, I counsel thee to buy of me gold tried in the fire. It's like, I don't step away necessarily from the symbolic in this. Everything has its symbolic, well, not, but when we're talking about like these objects, they have a symbolic meaning. Gold is the most precious of metals. It's always the gold standard, right? And silver is not quite so good, but the next one down, right? And precious stones, these are all the rarities and awards, and she was decked with all kinds of having a golden cup in her hand full of names of blasphemy. She was robed in purple and scarlet, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls. And, a lot of times when you're talking about a whore, especially in the ancient times, the lovers give them gifts. And Satan will give her gifts. Like the Lord Jesus counsels us to obtain gold. And he even says, buy it of me. Buy it. Obtain it. Trade what you have for something better. To become rich. And white raiment, that thou mayest be clothed, and the shame of thy nakedness doth not appear. This precious stones and pearls, these are all the things that she was wearing. The gifts from her lovers, or lover. The fine linen, again, the white linen that the saints wear is representative of their righteousness. So what is this representative? Of a false sense of righteousness, symbolically. Purple and silk, false royalty. Silk, the, very fine cloth. But, it's fancier, too, right? Than, like, let's say, linen. Linen is made from, like, plant-based. This is, I recall. But anyways, scarlet, all fine wood. I guess fancy wood for making fancy things. All manner of vessels of ivory. Precious stones. Vessels of precious, all these things. Vessels hold things. I don't have a lot of, just because they have some sort of symbolic meaning doesn't mean I attune to it. I don't know. But precious wood, a lot of these things go down in terms of value. We're kind of going down the line to the least valuable things, the least costly. And brass and iron and marble. Iron, a metal that's strong. There's so many things I don't. Well, like I said, it's like it makes me think of the statue of in Daniel, where it had the head was gold and the next level was silver, and then it became brass and iron, and then iron mixed with clay in the feet, and then a stone came and smashed the feet, and the whole thing collapsed. And because when you build something like that, you don't want to have the foundation be something weak. That's why in Christianity, it's interesting. Jesus is the top, but he's also the foundation stone. He's the most important part at the bottom, because it's important because he humbled himself. In all other, not all other necessarily, but in general, the general scheme of things, you know, those that are the most powerful, those that are the best, the brightest, they go to the top. You know, they go to the positions of leadership, where they have people under them who serve them, right? But Jesus said the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. And so he came, and though he is the most precious of all, he made sure that at the base of everything, he would stand. He's Alpha and Omega, the first and the last. Silk and scarlet. She was also decked in scarlet, and all fine wood. Okay, I read that. Brass, iron, marble. Cinnamon, odors, ointments, frankincense, costly ointments, wine, oil. See, I heard not the oil and the wine from chapter 6. Fine flour, wheat, and then beasts and sheep. Beasts, I assume, means... In fact, let's check that word real quick. I'm thinking it means wild beasts, like therion, like the beasts rising up out of the sea. Let's see. It'll just take a second. I'm not gonna bring you along. Beasts. Kutanos. It's a different word. Ah, beasts of burden. Okay. It's not wild beasts, because I wasn't thinking it would be like Zoa, which is like living creatures, the 4 living creatures. That's the third word that's translated beast in Revelation that I've been aware of. At first, you have the 4 beasts in chapter 5, 4 and 5, sorry, and then of course they occur in 6. But there it is, Zoa, living creatures, and then you have the. Sorry, I get so thirsty. Then you have the wild beasts of 13. You know, the beast rising up out of the sea, and also mentioned in 11, the beast that cometh out of the bottomless pit. Therion, wild beast. And then you have I forgot what it's pronounced. Beasts of burden. Cattle, oxen, horses get mentioned separately. Cattle, oxen, sheep, horses, and chariots. Chariots is, you know, we have cars, of course, right? But I mean, it also kind of represents a sort of technology. The basis on which, you know, they could travel quickly, make war. Also, they were a lot of times used ornamentally and fancy, especially for the upper classes. You know, in Rome, like the Caesar would ride into Rome, you know, after a successful campaign, and riding in his chariot. They weren't used for war very much at this time, but they were still used for racing and sports, and so they're kind of a vanity item, not so much a, you know, something that was used practically for war. And slaves and souls of men. Slaves. And, you know, there is, it's interesting, you know, I was going to do a study sometime called Slavery in the Bible. I just haven't had time to do the research. Because I think it's funny when people talk about it and they want to indict the law based on the fact that there is laws regulating slavery, as though the unregulated slavery is better. In ancient times, they had slavery and they regulated it to prevent abuses. Now, I never hear skeptics talk about the biblical fugitive slave law, and you never heard it talked about in the South during the time of the Civil War or during leading up, because it doesn't offer a very good justification for slavery, and also it's America's fugitive slave law was against what the Bible taught. The Bible taught that if a slave ran away from his master, and you were not to return him. And because a lot of times slavery was for debts and stuff. You know, people get into debt and they have no way of repaying. So they go into servitude to someone to repay the debt. Now that's within your society, of course. Then the people make war on people, other tribes and stuff, and take them as slaves. But even those slaves weren't to be mistreated. A lot of times they had nowhere to go, because very often you're talking about the women and children of who are left over from war, and just leaving them on their own is kind of like you kind of got to take them, because or kill them all. It's kind of what they had to do. It was one or the other, and so it's quite cruel. But that's there's some sort of, like I said, there's a. Like I said, we can just slaughter everybody, and that's pretty awful. Or we'll, after the battle's over and we've won, we'll take the women and children back and marry them off, and they'll be for servants and stuff. It's it's a different world than what we're used to. We're used to everything always so nice. Everything's also, everyone gets to live out their lives, and then you die in your bed surrounded by your loved ones, and then they bury you. It's so nice in America and in the West. But the ability to have that peace and that niceness is built on the strength of our military power. We've been able to put a buffer between us and the devilish elements of the world. And there is slavery today. For all humanity's posturing, we allow slavery, not legally, but I mean, it goes on underneath the surface, and it's not a problem that people really seriously address in politics. Is that, just like with having secure borders between countries is important, because that's how humans are trafficked across borders. When you can just take someone from one country to another, you pluck them out of their land, bring them to some place where they don't speak the language, and they're totally dependent, and it happens frequently. Much more frequently than I remember. I saw some statistic, and it's like there's millions of slaves in the world today. A lot of them are in, yes, countries other than America or Western Europe. But that's not to say it doesn't exist there either. It does. It's mostly, the sex trade in America and Europe and in developed countries. That's the kind of slavery that still exists. But there is slavery, like in Africa. There's a ton of it for labor and stuff like that. People being forced to work. Also in India. I think they said, I forgot which country they said was. And China, of course. I think they said China had the most. And and it goes to show that to the core of her kingdom is corrupt. I think it does not have the righteousness which Christ's kingdom brings. The kingdom of sin on earth is going to have a fake, false righteousness, and underneath the surface is going to be all manner of corruption. All manner of wickedness and evil is going to be going on under the surface. Trafficking in slaves and souls. And that's ultimately what, the merchandise that she is all about. Remember, she's a symbolic thing. She's not a real person, right? She symbolizes what those who abandon their faith become. Collectively they become this whore, and all that betray the faith are sort of under that umbrella of her. And as more people join her, she's trafficking in their souls and devouring their souls, so to speak, and taking them. They become part of her. And it's and that's what is religious proselytizing, but the trade of souls. Trying to get people to convert to one belief or another, or stop believing one thing and believe another. And she is the biggest trader in those things, in trader, in all those things that there is. And the fruits that I so lusted after are departed from thee. Like I said, when all those things are taken away briefly, everyone's going to really lose their mind. Not just because, like, the men's hearts are going to be failing for fear and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. I mean, that's very graphically explaining that it's not going to be normal. People are going to be really worked up, and people will literally. I think that literally it'll be so traumatic what's going on that some people will literally just expire from the trauma. Because stress can kill you. You know, your heart attacks can be caused by stress, and the stress of that will cause people to have heart attacks. And of course, I mean, why not? I mean, it's the biggest thing that already kills people. In at least in the West, in our country, biggest number one killer is heart disease. And so yeah, it's like you got a underlying heart condition, and then there's a new. I was watching a channel about prepping. You know, people who prep, and because I don't say you shouldn't prep for trouble, or for when they call it SHTF for basically, you know, when it hits the fan, to be ready for that. And it doesn't, but I think they're going to be sorry, the world can go through all kinds of convulsions that have nothing to do with the end of the world. So it's good to realize that the prosperity and the civilization you sit on top of, while not likely to just topple overnight, because I seriously doubt that, the things could happen though to make things very bad. I mean, it can get pretty bad without the world ending. So it doesn't hurt to have, you know, some sort of, I mean, I wanted to live in the country just to not be around cities for that very reason, of the fact that it can be dangerous. You know, you kind of have to get out, or it might be good to get out at certain times, or get away. And you know, anyways, but I think that's entirely different than when we're talking about the Great Tribulation. There's no way to prepare for it, and you know, there is. Men will be killed with hunger and death, and with the beasts of the earth. Killed with the sword, and with hunger and death, and the beasts of the earth. When the end starts out, it's going to be pretty wild. I mean, things are going to be falling apart, and people are going to be saying it's the end of the world, and they'll start acting like it. So the merchants are which were made rich by her, still stand afar off for the fear of her torment, weeping and wailing. Yes, the merchants, saying, "Alas, alas, that great city that was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls." Yeah, for in 1 hour is so great riches. For in 1 hour so great riches is come to naught. And every shipmaster and all the company and ships and sailors, and as many as trade by the sea, stood afar off, and cried when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, "What city is like unto this great city?" Ah, yes. It's like when they say they worship the beast, and they wondered at all the world wondered after the beast. Say, who can make war with him? Who is like to the beast? Who can make war with him? Because he will have his war against the saints, you know, and overcome them. Though that, you know, when they say who is it like to the beast, that's before he even overcomes them. Because there's no power in the world that will stand against him except the saints. The rest of the world will submit. Every part of it, everyone in the world will submit. When you see everything in the world submitting to one person or a single system, you can, whatever that is, it's Antichrist. And that's why Christians traditionally are very much against the drive to globalize the world and to bring it all under one authority. I remember, and I've mentioned this before, that there's this guy, this Japanese fellow, or he's American for sure. I mean, he doesn't sound Japanese, but that's what he looks like. I could have just said his name, Miyakaku, right? He's this scientist, smart guy. But he gets up there and he says, oh, you know, they talk about different levels of civilization, like a type 0, type 1. He said, right now we're at type 0 because we don't have a global government. Type 1 civilizations are global civilizations where the whole globe is under one, and I'm like, well, how do you know that, and then he talks about interplanetary and like, how do you know that the most advanced civilizations aren't, anarchic? Like why is it assumed that the more advanced you get, the more centralized government you have? Why is that so? Wouldn't the most advanced people be all able to govern themselves? Why would they have to have a central authority and planetary control? I was, that made me, I questioned that. I was like, why is that assumption? There's no proof, no evidence even. No evidence. There's no evidence that a global government is even going to be stable. We aren't alien civilizations. We are humans. Like, you can't just apply some arbitrary idea of what you think the future ought to look like to human beings without considering human beings. The nature of any sort of... the bigger we build things, the more dangerous it gets. That's how it is. Because that's where we get the idea of, power corrupting. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And we get these ideas, and we have things like the Tower of Babel to remind us that what happens. It's like it is built into the system. Like, the bigger we build, the more unstable it becomes, as far as like civilizations. And when you start mixing iron with clay, you can't, because the world is not a one thing. You know what I mean? Like, and the drive to unify it is entirely premature. It would result in something very horrific, actually, is what would happen. Because you have so much difference between people. And I don't even mean like racial differences. I mean like wealth discrepancies and stuff like that. Then it would tear things apart. At least that's my opinion. But she has, in her is all this wealth and riches. That just to be part of that, everyone gets a little slice of the pie. And he's gonna, but it's still. Well, it only actually, because of his power and his wisdom, and the fact that he is, Satan. He actually makes it work. He could rule our world with one thing, but he's evil. And inside of that kingdom, there's all this corruption. He's able to keep it together. But because of the nature of how powerful he is. But the Lord won't let it stand. Just like with Babel is. No. I will confuse their languages. I just feel like we're already in a kind of a Tower of Babel time. Because like literally, like in America, you look at the divide between the right and the left, and they literally can't talk to each other in in many ways. Like even when they are talking to each other, like they're not really communicating with each other. Like maybe one, you might argue, well, one side understands the other better. Maybe, but the fact that there's no, communication requires a two-way thing. If one person is talking, the other person gets it, and then that person starts talking to the other person, and they're not getting it. That's not communication. You know what I mean? It requires two to be able to interact with each other, and I see that in I see a lot of examples of that, and I think it's only going to get worse. I'd like to see it get better, because it's like I don't really want. I like the world as it is right now. In terms of being able to preach the gospel, peace is good. It's good to have peace, and to prosper. But those who long for war and conflict are foolish. These things are never good. When they see the smoke of her burning, they're gonna cry out, what city was like that city? And they cast dust on their heads, cried, weeping and wailing. Well, this is the ships and sailors, right? They're also reacting. Because they also have part of the commerce, right? All that had ships in the sea, by reason of her costliness, for in 1 hour she made desolate. Rejoice over her, rejoice over her, thou heaven, and the holy apostles and prophets, for God hath avenged you on her. So an interjected statement there. Amongst all the weeping and wailing, rejoice over her. Rejoice at her fall. You know, it's funny because I was talking to someone over the weekend, and they had a bunch of questions for me. And, they were saying how someone, told them, oh, I can't believe in God because how could he let children die? Right? And, I did a study. It's in my questions, I think, playlist. I did, have you heard of Jesus? There was early on when I was doing the live streams, I was getting this person came in and they made a little comment, and I'll check the live chat right now. But I usually don't because nobody ever, it's fine. It's just there. But he said, have you heard of Jesus, the pregnant woman killer? Jesus, the baby killer? Well, God, the thing people don't understand about God is that God kills everybody. And that's the baseline from which, that's the baseline fairness of the world. You came from nothing, you return to nothing. Dust you are, and to dust you shall return. That's the first thing, when Adam sinned, that's what God says, and it didn't, eating that which was forbidden on the, it's intentionally not a massive transgression. But as far as, when God makes us, he's already putting us in debt. We have no justification for our existence. Like, I can't say, like, morally speaking, like, before I was conceived, before I came into being, that there was like a moral necessity for me to exist. There's no like compelling moral necessity to bring me into being. Otherwise, and if that, because like, otherwise, like every menstrual period should be a conception. If there's it would be a moral necessity. I don't believe in abortion, but I do believe it's okay to abstain from conceiving a child if you don't feel ready for one, but you're preventing someone from coming into being. And you know what? There's no moral imperative that forces, that says, no, you must have a child as soon as possible, and whenever possible, and always when possible. And that may seem like a strange thing to argue, and I never hear anyone argue it, and it may say, well, what's that? What's so? It's like, well, from the moment I'm conceived, now I've received a blessing of existence. I've received a good thing. And if I am aborted, it's like, like I always get annoyed when people say, well, all the aborted fetuses go to heaven. Well, then we should have more abortions, shouldn't we? I don't believe that. That's not what happens. There's no guarantee. Oh, just because you got to be a fetus, now you get to live forever? Oh, no. Maybe you get torn limb from limb, and then oblivion, or whatever. I mean, some people do. I don't say, well, are you going to say, because it becomes difficult when you believe in, it's either eternal torture or heaven. And say, well, they never did anything wrong. They deserve heaven. They deserve, why? Why should they deserve to live forever? Nobody deserves to live forever. Nobody deserves to live forever. Well, they don't deserve to be tormented forever. Well, they had a sinful nature. They would have sinned, but they didn't yet. Well, maybe they should just get a chance to sin. And then, but no, I don't, I believe you return to dust. We return to the oblivion from which we came. So that's eminently fair. It's completely fair. If I come from nothing, I return to nothing. And so, like the fact that God allows these things to happen, the reason I'm saying that now is because you're going to rejoice over the whore? It says rejoice over her. You know? Because ultimately, the whore represents those who gleefully and willingly put the saints to death for Satan. You know, not knowing he's Satan, but whatever. They just because people do evil in the name of good, or think they're doing good and do evil, it's like, is that a reason to give them a pass? Oh, well, they were deceived. They thought they were doing the right thing, as they killed people, trafficked in slaves, and generally, enriched themselves. They thought it was good as they prospered and filled themselves up with costly things. All the, what did I say? Well, whatever. I was saying all things which were dainty and goodly. I don't know why I didn't look up the word dainty there, just because I was like, dainty? Dainty? What's that mean? 14. Dainty, leparos, oily or fatty, figuratively in that sense, rich. The fat and the bright. That's what goodly means. Bright. Lampros. The bright and shiny. Is actually, fat often means shine. The way oil will cause shine, fat, having grease rubbed on something makes it shiny. The shiny, the bright and shiny. All things which are bright and shiny. That's what this means. Dainty and goodly is better translated. Bright and shiny. They lusted after the bright and shiny. But I mean, in a sense, like being trained to, being told, forgive, right? Forgive, have compassion. These are things we are told to build up. But there comes a moment in time where it says, as she's burning, rejoice over her, you holy apostles and prophets, for God has avenged you on her. There is, in the New Testament, I think people forget, it's not just here. The Lord Jesus taught similar things. Like when he says, whatsoever you shall bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Whatsoever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. It's a very delicate matter, because while we have this sort of, like in parables, like you have the parable of the man who owed his Lord much, and the Lord found he had wasted his goods, he'd owed him a lot of money, and he forgave him a large debt, and then that man went and beat his fellow servant who owed him just a few pence. And the master said, I had compassion on you. You should have had compassion on your fellow servant. And that's true. But that is not to say there are not those who don't get forgiveness or compassion. For example, Ananias and Sapphira in the book of Acts. They sold a piece of land, then they lied about how much money they got for it. And it was entirely voluntary. They didn't have to give any money. But they came in to make a big show about it. We sold the land, and this is the money we got for it, and here we're laying at your feet. They kept half. And it wasn't about giving, they had to give it all. The point was that they were trying to make themselves seem more godly than they were. They were trying to deceive the apostles and the Holy Spirit. And that's the way they characterized it. You haven't lied to men, you lied to the Holy Spirit. And they were struck dead right there. Or her husband, Ananias was. Then Sapphira comes in and she answers the same way. They're both of them. There's kind of two witnesses there. The judgment of God is a fearsome thing. It is fierce and fearful. But also it is right. It's one thing when you have someone who just owes you a little bit. They've sinned small against you. They've done some trifling thing. Like whatever, something small. They've called you a name or besmirched your reputation, whatever, or maybe they owe you money or whatever. These things can be forgiven and ought to be forgiven, and we ought to be careful about holding things against people. But the unrepentant, unjust, those who continually and perpetually fight against the righteous and resist godliness and indeed ultimately are willing to put it to death, there is no mercy for them. In fact, hooray. You know what I mean? When they finally, because, now in this point in time, like let's say we get some person who is an enemy of the gospel, it would be wrong for me to wish either harm or any sort of bad thing on them. Or say like, let's say there's some person who does great harm to the cause of Christ. And they're so grievous, you think, I wish they were dead, right? You think that in your darkest side, if you're willing to admit it, you have people who might be so grievous that you think it would be better if they were dead. It would be better if they weren't there. Maybe you don't say, I wish they were not a thing, Maybe you don't specifically say, wish something so dark on them as death. But, you don't know when in maybe some time, in the process of time, that the Lord may work on them and bring them over to our side, just like with the Apostle Paul. So we don't know. But at this point, when the judgment of God is poured out, they're not coming back or over. It's the revelation of, no, these are the wicked and they are to be burned. Rejoice over them. And I love this picture here. Okay, we got 15 minutes. And a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and cast it into the sea, saying, Thus with violence shall that great city Babylon be thrown down, and shall be found no more at all. And the voice of harpers and musicians and of pipers and trumpeters shall be heard no more at all in thee. And no craftsman of whatsoever craft he be shall be found any more in thee. And the sound of a millstone shall be heard no more at all in thee. And the light of the candles shall shine no more at all in thee. And the voice of the bridegroom and of the bride shall be heard no more at all in thee. For thy merchants were the great men of the earth, for by thy sorceries were all nations deceived. And in her was found the blood of prophets and of saints, and of all that were slain upon the earth. Recently, it's interesting, I found, there was recently, last week, there was the guy who shot up those people in New Zealand. And, and it's horrific, terrible, and something that no one should do. But, I saw someone talking about it, and, but our government will sanction people to go over and do it. You know what I mean? They'll go over to their country. We're not allowed to, don't do it in our countries, but when the government decides it's okay, they can just send people over and they'll shoot them up. We killed tens of thousands of them, in their countries. And that was okay, I guess. It's just fine. I never heard of anybody getting in trouble for it, right? All the people who ordered that, they're still kicking, happy, and all the deaths of thousands are on their hands, and they are held guiltless. But he arbitrarily blah blah. It's like just because a bunch of people so if you get enough people who have powerful positions who agree to go kill people, it's okay. I'm not saying any of it's right. I'm not justifying what was done, but it's like, I don't know. I think that the way you make peace peacefully, or you subdue your enemies completely. You don't just go in and make a mess and then bug out and then Say, well, next generation, I'm sure you'll hate us more. Whatever. Okay, so the mighty angel taking up the stone like a great millstone. Doesn't that immediately bring to mind some things that Jesus said, that if anyone would offend one of these little ones, that it would be better for them to have a millstone hanged about their neck and to be cast into the sea? And that's just, and again, I've seen stuff like this. I saw online someone had a picture of, like, they were saying this is what should happen to pedophiles, and they had a guy with a chained to a millstone, and he was sinking in the water and whatever. That's what I'm saying is that idea is that so horrible? You're just being drowned, but it sounds horrible, doesn't it? I mean, it's sort of like saying being dragged. The idea of just being dragged to the bottom of the sea is it's like being buried in the deepest hole. You know what I mean? When you be tied to something so heavy, means to be just drag you down to the deepest, darkest place in the world. So it's a kind of a I don't want to say an analogy, but there's a it's a very symbolic kind of death, as far as, like, it's very not symbolic, iconic. You know what I mean? And crucifixion is a iconic. It's very visibly evokes a certain image, and being drowned in the sea with a millstone hung about your neck is also very iconic. And so when he throws down, the millstone is this big, heavy, round stone. He takes this great stone like a millstone. So it's not apparently not actually a millstone, but just kind of like one. And he throws it into the sea. And this big, heavy thing, and with this kind of violence, that great city of Babylon is going to be thrown down. I love I love singing this part. And shall be found no more at all. There are no more about Babylon is going to be like a giant. She's going to be thrown down with this kind of violence, and also kind of be gone. That's the idea of, and that's part of the idea of, like, when you crucify someone, the body's there and you can bury it. You got to deal with the body. Actually, you have to do something about it. I mean, you can have the buzzards pick at it or whatever, but it's there. When you hang a millstone about someone's neck and you throw them into the ocean, it's like they disappear instantly. It's like they go down alive. Like, the last I saw them, they were alive, but I'm pretty sure that finished them off. I mean, it's like sending them alive into the deep. You know what I mean? And it is a fearful way to die. I mean, you think about it, it's scary. It's traumatic. And the onlookers don't have to bother with you. They just send you away. Sink them. And so she's gonna disappear. It's a way to make someone disappear. Like this. Like the traditional mobster death of pouring cement over someone's feet and then tossing them in the water. Very similar kind of death. It's a death that is meant to make you disappear simultaneously as you are killed. And so she's going to disappear. She's going to burn up, but she's also going to be gone. The smoke of her burning is going to be a very brief little thing. And then she's going to be thrown down and be found no more at all. The voice of harpers, musicians, and there's going to be music associated with this kingdom. There was music in her. And not just all this riches, there was also music and trumpeters and pipers. Celebration, where they celebrate. They send gifts one to another. After they finish killing off the saints, they rejoice and they send gifts. It's like Christmas. And craftsmen, they need craftsmen because they got to build their big fancy churches. I'm sorry. The whore is not the church, okay? Never. But it is made of people who left the church. Yes, indeed. That's why she's a whore. You can't have a whore that's made up of a bunch of atheists. That's another thing. I don't know how can you have a great whore? Well, I guess they explain it some other way, right? They must. And say if the rapture comes, how can you have a great whore? She is the apostasy. And then prior to at the beginning of Revelation, we have 7 churches, and 5 of them are warned, but they aren't the whore yet. Even though they got whoredoms in the midst of them, you suffer that woman Jezebel, which calleth herself a prophet. You've got Jezebel already in your church. You're a step away from being the great whore. You know what I mean? Because that's accustoms the having fornication in your church. I don't know. It's like so. I know, like good quote unquote Christian kids are fornicators. And when you accustom them to that kind of sin, it's like it corrupts them, and it corrupts their faith, and it corrupts their whole walk, because they've removed from it that sense of godly righteousness, that we ought to be walking, that we shouldn't do things like fornicate, things that are specifically led in the Bible as like, yeah, that's some of the that's something to watch out for. We've said no, it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. It's just, I mean, people do it all the time, right? It's just what it is. It's just sex, that's all it is. It's just sex. It's no big deal. It's like, it's a big deal. It's a big problem. Engaging in that, it leads to the corruption of your church. It leads to the corruption of you as an individual. It leads to the corruption of everything. And that's what, if you look back in time, it's what's leading our civilization towards collapse. Because people become just obsessed with it. Say, oh, isn't it great to fornicate? Yes, indeed. As the city burns around you. The sound of a millstone should be heard no more at all in thee. The grinding, the working, craftsman, the grinding the flour to make the fine breads. Industry of all types. The light of a candle shall shine no more at all in thee. No light at all. There's not even a glimmer of light. Nothing but darkness. The voice of the bridegroom and of the bride. The celebration. The rejoicing of the newlywed. The bridegroom and the bride. No more. And there, like I said, she sits a queen. She's got a husband. She's no widow. But it says, what did the Lord Jesus say? So also shall be the coming of the Son of Man, as in the days of Noah. For they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and the flood came and took them all away. They will be rejoicing, in those days after the witnesses are killed, there'll be weddings and rejoicing and all kinds of celebration. And the kingdom is finally established. And they can be fully wed to their Lord and Savior, the devil. For thy merchants were the great men of the earth. For by thy sorceries were all nations deceived. It's interesting. The merchants who were of her merchandise. And again, who are these merchants anyways? I'd say they're symbolic. But, right, I said that. They are symbolic. But they're symbolic of what and who exactly? It's like, I'll tell you who. It's like, they're your ministers, pastors, the ones who traffic in souls, the ones who ultimately lead, the ones who do all the trading in the midst of it. I mean, there's outless, I think it represents literal trading and literal of all the actual goods we're talking about, but there are the merchants of souls, right? And they will have a huge role in turning people, because it's like, if you have a church, it's like I said, I mean, You know what I mean? I've said this before. Like when the deception comes, when the Antichrist appears, the thought that people are going to be like, well, he's saying a lot of things. Let's go check our Bibles. Or they're going to say, Paul, what do you make of this? Well, they might ask that, but they're not going to. That's more of a trap. Honestly, that's going to be a trap because people will just want you to affirm what they already believe. They're not going to be genuinely interested in listening to you. I've had that so many times. People ask me what I think, and it's like, and then they don't like what I think. So, and that's normal. I mean, maybe they genuinely are interested, but they genuinely were interested in hearing me affirm what they already believe. And that's a normal human thing that happens between people. So they're not going to come to you and say, "Hey, what does all this mean? Is this okay? Is it okay to worship this guy because I was kind of inclined with all the miracles he was doing? Like, is it okay? What's the Bible say about this?" They're not going to say that. And if anyone were to have power to lead them in the right direction, it would be pastors. If they were church-going folks, and their priest or their pastor or their whatever reverend, whatever kind of title they give the officer of their church, it was leading them against Antichrist, they might listen to him because they've been listening to him already. But I mean, honestly, if they weren't really listening, if they were just nominally there, right? Because a lot of churches, it's just natural, and they allow for, and they're set up in such a way that it creates nominalism, where people are nominally Christian and there, and because the environment allows that to be produced. The preaching is sufficiently, milquetoast, that it, at the same time does not provoke nor inspire, but just kind of kicks the can down the road, I guess, or I don't know, just keeps things rolling. Just religious enough to make people feel good about having been there, but not so religious so as to offend those who do not really desire the things of God, or to inspire those, who would love to hear a more inspired message. And would not be offended at all at that. Those people are not served, and in the interest of keeping all the people there who might not like it if it got too serious. But the pastor, if people are there, now there's kind of a middle ground of people who are pretty serious, but just believe in church. Even though if, maybe they have a decent one. I don't know. I've been to a few churches I thought were pretty decent. All right. But still, the pastors are the ones who are going to have to lead them because they're so dependent already on what the pastor says. And as they fall and begin, working in the traffic of the whore, and the souls of men, they will become the traffickers of the souls. The merchants were the great men of the earth. See, they became great men. The great men, from having participated in this. That's how I kind of say it. For by thy sorceries. Now, sorceries, people will say, well, hey, that's pharmakia. Don't you know that? That means drugs. Yeah. Like, let's look at that. I wanted to actually just check on that is pharmakia. Yeah, pharmakia. And it says the quick definition from Bible Hub is the use of medicine, drugs, or spells. It is not an indictment of medicine per se. It's like saying, let's take it as primarily just medicine. By your medicine, they were deceived. It's not saying that all medicine is bad. What it's saying is her medicine is bad. I'm going to use medicine because I mean, you could say it does mean in a sense because you could say magical spells. And I've had people say, well, does that mean prescription drugs are evil? They're like magical spells? Prescription drugs are developed based on science, not based on magic. You know what I mean? Science is not magic. It's the opposite of it. It's just the testing. It's a method. It's a tool. It's more different. It's got more in common with woodcraft than witchcraft. Okay, that's a good one. It's not. There's nothing devilish about it. And the science we do today is developed primarily by Christian people. Okay, even though some people will say it's anti-Christian, it's not. It's really not at all. And so medicine in general is not your local pharmacy is not a depository of witchcraft and sorcery. It is not. Now, people will use things like hallucinogens or drugs to try to contact spirits and stuff, and that is sorcery, witchcraft, and such. Right. Using it for like trying magical purposes. But I don't even want to go that way. I want to just take it as medicine. Because there's good medicine and there's bad medicine, right? Some medications aren't so good for you, right? And they have side effects. Because our science is imprecise. I mean, it's fairly precise, but it's like we're talking about the human body. It's very mysterious. And so biology is imprecise. Because, for one, each human individual is different. And so that's why people react differently to medicines, and they don't even know why a lot of times, right? They don't know, at least not off the bat. Like, oh, well, 1 in 100,000 experience seizures from taking this medicine. We tested it on 1,000 people. We didn't detect that until we released it to the general population. That can happen. Oh, great, I got that bad medicine song in my head now. Your love is like bad medicine. Bad medicine is what I need. Well, she has, like, what it's saying is, what I'm saying is, I'm taking this like, she's offering a cure. Remember, the world's going to come into, you got to take this in context. The world is going to come into a time when men's hearts are failing them for fear, for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, right? It's going to be all, hell is broken loose. And she has the cure. And that is turn your eyes upon our Lord. Look to him and he will fix everything. And everything will be prosperous again. And everything will be good again. And everyone's like, yeah, let's take that. Let's take that medicine. Let's fix everything how you say. And in that sense, that's the sorcery she works, is to deceive the nations, to use the power of the devil to work miracles, and also just to fix the visible structure of the world, to put things back together, at least to the degree to which people feel like we can move forward and the world isn't going to end, and we're saved. He's going to come in like a savior to save everything. And this is going to deceive all the nations of the world. Okay. And in her was found the blood of prophets and of saints and of all that were slain upon the earth. In her is compassed all that blood. Because she's going to, be the culmination of because she is a symbolic person. She's a symbolic traitor, betrayer, in all those senses. But she will be the one who puts the saints to death. And many others besides. Because like I said, it's like, how the devil comes in, it's like, will he come in, maybe he starts killing people like prominent non-believers. To hell with you. Now, it says in Isaiah 14 of the king of Babylon, and this is Mystery Babylon. So if she's a queen, who's her king?